And welcome back to the final chapter of The Great and Dead Gatsby. This is Ward here, along with my good friend Colonel, Sergeant, Master, and Commander Kyle.
Hello.
What's your actual?
Sergeant First Class.
For the
Army.
U.S. Army. Cool. All right. So let's get started. After 2 years, I remember the rest of that day, and that night, and the next day, only as an endless drill of police and photographers and newspapermen in and out of Gatsby's front door. A rope stretched across the main gate, and a policeman by it kept out the curious, but little boys soon discovered that they could enter through my yard, and there were always a few of them clustered open-mouthed about the pool. I love that the adults are trying to get in, but then also the kids are trying to get in.
Yeah.
Like, they're just all the same.
It's like the same thing as when the other guy died, right? The kids were like looking for the blood stains.
Oh, that's right.
The dark spots.
That's totally what I would have done. Someone with a positive manner, perhaps a detective, used the expression madman as he bent over Wilson's body that afternoon, and the adventurous authority of his voice set the key for the newspaper reports next morning. The adventurous authority. He's trying to make a story out of it, of course. Most of these reports were a nightmare, grotesque, circumstantial, eager, and untrue. When Michaelis' testimony at the inquest brought to light Wilson's suspicions of his wife, I thought the whole tale would shortly be served up in racy pasquinade. Do you know what that is?
Mm-mm.
I'm gonna guess it's some sort of like a French love story tragedy. Let's see. Served up in a racy pasquinade, but Catherine, who might have said anything, didn't say a word. She showed a surprising amount of character about it, too. Looked at the coroner with determined eyes under the corrected brow of hers and swore that her sister had never seen Gatsby, that her sister was completely happy with her husband, and that her sister had been into no mischief whatever. What is it?
So it's a satire or lampoon, originally one displayed or delivered publicly in a public place.
So a satire?
Yeah. So basically,
or a lampoon.
You're
a joke.
Criticizing something.
Yep.
Yeah, with a joke, yeah. In front of everybody.
Like an SNL skit. She convinced herself of it and cried into her handkerchief as if the very suggestion was more than she could endure. So Wilson was reduced to a man deranged by grief in order that the case might remain in its simplest form. And it rested there. It's interesting that, again, Wilson ends up, the one person who's a working and honest person is the one who ends up being screwed, even in death.
Yeah.
Right? Because if they had told the story or the facts that she was having an affair, then everyone would be like, oh, yes, that makes sense. Almost like, not a heroic man, but kind of like a...
Like it's like an honor kill.
Right, yeah. Like, yeah, there would be from some men, and maybe some women at least, there would probably be some like, I understand. But instead, he's just painted as a crazy person.
Yeah.
Who, for no reason, is the one who because he's sad because his wife died, right?
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to something more.
Maybe he blames it on the rich. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Some sort of pasquinade there.
Pasquinade. #Pasquinade. But all this part of it seemed remote and unessential. I found myself at Gatsby's side and alone. From the moment I telephoned news of the catastrophe to West Egg Village, every surmise about him and every practical question was referred to me. At first I was surprised and confused. Then as he lay in his house and didn't move or breathe or speak hour upon hour, it grew upon me that I was responsible. Because no one else was interested. Interested, I mean, with the intense personal interest to which everyone has some vague right at the end. And so then Nick is the only one who actually cared about Gatsby, right?
Mm-hmm.
I called up Daisy half an hour after we found him. Called her instinctively and without hesitation. But she and Tom had gone away early that afternoon and taken baggage with them. Left no address? Nope. Say when they'd be back? Nope. Any idea where they are? How I could reach them? I don't know. Can't say. And why did they leave?
To get away from all the hoopla, right? Just like
Well, I think there's a safety measure of it too, right? Because Daisy killed somebody.
oh,
So they're fleeing just in case, right?
that makes sense. Yeah, I didn't think of that.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to get somebody for him. I wanted to go into the room where he lay and reassure him. I'll get somebody for you, Gatsby. Don't worry. Just trust me. I'll get somebody for you. And by get somebody, he means somebody who would care about him, right?
Mm-hmm.
Someone who from his past.
Or maybe to say something at his funeral.
Maybe, yeah. Otherwise, Nick would say it. Meyer Wolfsheim's name wasn't in the phone book. The butler gave me his office address on Broadway, and I called information. But by the time I had the number, it was long after 5, and no one answered the phone. Will you ring again? I've rung them 3 times. It's very important. Sorry. I'm afraid no one's here, or no one's there. I went back to the drawing room and thought of an instant that they were chance visitors, all these official people who suddenly filled it. But as they drew back the sheet and looked at Gatsby with unmoved eyes, his protest continued in my brain. Look here, old sport. You've got to get somebody for me. You've got to try hard. I can't go through this alone. So one started to ask me questions, and I broke away, and going upstairs, looked hastily through the unlocked parts of his desk. He'd never told me definitely that his parents were dead, but there was nothing. Only the picture of Dan Cody, a token of forgotten violence, staring down from the wall. And again, part of what Fitzgerald's doing here, right, is he's painting Gatsby as, in the end, after he has achieved the American dream and he has achieved success and riches, he's left with nothing. He's like Scrooge at the end of Christmas, or at the third Ghost, right? In Christmas Carol, where he's died and no one goes to his funeral.
No one goes to the
and
funeral.
People like celebrate his death.
Yeah, I guess that is what it is. Like it's just a charade. In the end, it's just like his final party, right? Everyone's just showing up, and
it's exactly it. It's his final party. His house is full again of guests, but this time, it's not. He's not running the circus. But like usual, he's not part of it.
Yeah.
Still not drinking. So, Next morning, I sent the butler to New York with a letter for Wolfsheim, which asked for information and urged him to come out on the next train. That request seemed superfluous when I wrote it. I was sure he'd start when he saw the newspapers, just as I was sure there'd be a wire from Daisy before noon. But neither a wire nor Mr. Wolfsheim arrived. No one arrived except more police and photographers and newspapermen. When the butler brought back Wolfsheim's answer, I began to have a feeling of defiance, of scornful solidarity between Gatsby and me against them all. Dear Mr. Carraway, this has been one of the most terrible shocks of my life. To me, I hardly can believe that it is true at all. Such a mad act as that man did should make us all think. I cannot come down now, as I am tied up in some very important business, and cannot get mixed up in this thing now. If there is anything I can do a little later, let me know in a letter by Edgar. I hardly know where I am when I hear about a thing like this, and am completely knocked down and out. Yours truly, Meyer Wolfsheim. And then hastily, addenda beneath. Let me know about the funeral, etc. Do not know his family at all. Sorry, allergies, not coronavirus. It's important to point that out.
Distinguish those.
Yeah. And again, we've got, why doesn't he go there? Because he doesn't want to be tied to Gatsby, probably, reputation-wise.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like, he can't be connected, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or it might be bad for Gatsby, it might be bad for him.
But most importantly, it's bad for business, right? Business comes before all other personal relationships, and in Fitzgerald's criticism of America, right? And that's kind of what people are saying when they're complaining about the economy still being shut down from COVID-19. People are saying, well, no, business needs to come first. And, there is a valid point to that, at least to some extent, right? Which is like people's well-being does come from money to a certain extent, right? Rent requires you to have money. Mortgages require you to have money. So, like, it's not to say that that's an invalid argument, that it's important for people to be able to make a living, but, then that is the great argument right now, which is, at what point do we say people's health and lives don't matter that much over business?
Yeah, That's a good, tough decision. I'm glad that I don't have to make.
I'm glad I'm not in charge. When the phone rang that afternoon and long distance said Chicago was calling, I thought this would be Daisy at last. But the connection came through as a man's voice, very thin and far away. This is Slangle speaking. Yes? The name was unfamiliar. Hell of a note, isn't it? Get my wire? There haven't been any wires. Young Park's in trouble, he said rapidly. They picked him up when he handed the bonds over the counter. They got a circular from New York giving him the numbers just 5 minutes before. What do you know about that, hey? You never can tell in these hick towns. Hello? I interrupted breathlessly. Look here, this isn't Mr. Gatsby. Mr. Gatsby's dead. There was a long silence on the other end of the wire, followed by an exclamation, then a quick squawk as the connection broke. I think it was Young Park's in trouble. They picked him up when he handed the bonds over the counter. They got a circular from New York giving him numbers just 5 minutes before, right? So now we get another clue into how Gatsby made his money, which was, this looks like some sort of counterfeit bond deal where they're probably trying to like cash in counterfeit bonds and get cash back from a bank. But then people were onto them, so New York bank sent something to Chicago and was like, watch out for these bonds if someone tries to turn them in.
Yeah. I was thinking maybe they were stolen.
Maybe
that's what the scheme was. Mm-hmm. They're kind of skimming them and then exchanging them.
Mm-hmm. That would also work. But again, you get this idea of Fitzgerald is kind of like tearing down the facade that is Gatsby, right? All of it's coming down. And again, pointing out from Fitzgerald's point of view, probably that all of the romanticism that we have about these great American business people and about this great American dream is that it's really just a dirty criminal enterprise underneath. I think it was the third day that a telegram signed Henry C. Gatz arrived from a town in Minnesota. It said only that the sender was leaving immediately and to postpone the funeral until he came. It was Gatsby's father, a solemn old man, very helpless and dismayed, bundled up in a long, cheap ulster against the warm September day. His eyes leaked continuously with excitement, and when I took the bag and umbrella from his hands, he began to pull so incessantly at his sparse gray beard that I had difficulty in getting off his coat. He was on the point of collapse, so I took him into the music room and made him sit down while I sent for something to eat. But he wouldn't eat, and a glass of milk spilled from his trembling hand. I saw it in the Chicago newspaper, he said. It was all in the Chicago newspaper. I started right away. I didn't know how to reach you. His eyes, seeing nothing, moved ceaselessly about the room. It was a madman, he said. He must have been mad. Wouldn't you like some coffee? I urged him. I don't want anything. I'm all right now, Mr. Carraway. Well, I'm all right now. Where have they got Jimmy? I took him into the drawing room where his son lay and left him there. Some little boys came up on the steps and were looking into the hall. When I told them who had arrived, they went reluctantly away, right? Because they want to see the dad in there. After a little while, Mr. Gatz opened the door and came out, his mouth ajar, his face flushed slightly, his eyes leaking isolated and unpunctual tears. He had reached an age where death no longer has the quality of ghastly surprise, and when he looked around him, now, for the first time, and saw the heightened splendor of the hall, and the great rooms opening out from it into other rooms, his grief began to be mixed with an odd pride. I helped him to the bedroom upstairs. While he took off his coat and vest, I told him that all arrangements had been deferred until he came. I don't know what you'd want, Mr. Gatsby. Gatz is my name. Mr. Gatz. I thought you might want to take the body west. He shook his head. Jimmy always liked it better down east. He rose up to his position in the east. Were you a friend of my boy's, Mr.? He can't remember his name. We were close friends. He had a big future before him, you know. He was only a young man, but he had a lot of brain power here. He touched his head impressively and nodded. If he'd have lived, he'd have been a great man. A man like James J. Hill. He'd have helped build up the country. That's true, I said, uncomfortably. He fumbled at the embroidered coverlet, trying to take it from the bed and lay down stiffly. He was instantly asleep. And it's interesting that his dad's also kind of dreaming about his future, right? And clearly, like his dad, like had this dream for him also that he'd be like another great American entrepreneur and business person.
Mm-hmm. He doesn't know like the truth.
Right, not at all. That night, an obviously frightened person called up and demanded to know who I was before he would give his name. "This is Mr. Caraway," I said. "Oh," he sounded relieved. "This is Klipspringer." I was relieved too, for that seemed to promise another friend at Gatsby's grave. I didn't want it to be in the papers and draw a sightseeing crowd, so I'd been calling up a few people myself. They were hard to find. "The funeral's tomorrow," I said. 3 o'clock here at the house. I wish you'd tell anybody who'd be interested." "Oh, I will," he broke out hastily. "Of course, I'm not likely to see anybody, but if I do." His tone made me suspicious. "Of course, you'll be there yourself." "Well, I'll certainly try. What I called up about is—" "Wait a minute," I interrupted. "How about saying you'll come?" "Well, the fact is, the truth of the matter is that I'm staying with some people up here in Greenwich, and they rather expect me to be with them tomorrow. In fact, there's a sort of picnic or something. Of course, I'll do my best to get away." I ejaculated an unrestrained, "Huh?" and he must have heard me, for he went on nervously. "What I called up about was a pair of shoes I left there. I wonder if it'd be too much trouble to have the butler send them on? You see, they're tennis shoes, and I'm sort of helpless without them. My address is care of B.F. I didn't hear the rest of the name because I hung up the receiver. I know, right? All these exceptionally shallow people. Gatsby did not create any lasting relationships.
This guy lived at his house. This is the border, right?
Is this the border?
Yeah.
It is the border. The piano
player.
He's
doing like the rower thing when they're walking around.
Yep. It's too bad about his tennis game being all crap without the shoes. After that, I felt a certain shame for Gatsby. One gentleman to whom I telephoned implied that he had got what he deserved. However, that was my fault, for he was one of those who used to sneer most bitterly at Gatsby on the courage of Gatsby's liquor, and I should have known better than to call him. The morning of the funeral, I went up to New York to see Meyer Wolfsheim. I couldn't seem to reach him any other way. The door that I pushed open on the advice of an elevator boy was marked the Swastika Holding Company, and at first there didn't seem to be anyone inside. But when I had shouted "hello" several times in vain, an argument broke out behind a partition, and presently a lovely Jewess appeared at an interior door and scrutinized me with black, hostile eyes. "Nobody's in," she said. "Mr. Wolfsheim's gone to Chicago." The first part of this was obviously untrue, for someone had begun to whistle the rosary timelessly inside. "Please say that Mr. Caraway wants to see him." "I can't get him back from Chicago, can I?" At this moment, a voice unmistakably Wolfsheim's called, "Stella!" from the other side of the door. "Leave your name on the desk," she said quickly. "I'll give it to him when he gets back." "But I know he's there," because he just yelled. She took a step toward me and began to slide her hands indignantly up and down her hips. "You young men think you can force your way in here any time," she scolded. "We're getting sick and tired of it. When I say he's in Chicago, he's in Chicago." I mentioned Gatsby. "Oh," she looked at me over again. "Will you just... what was your name?" She vanished. In a moment, Meyer Wolfsheim stood solemnly in the doorway, holding out both hands. He drew me into his office, remarking in a reverent voice that it was a sad time for all of us, and offered me a cigar. "My memory goes back to when I first met him," he said. "A young major just out of the army and covered over with medals he got in the war. He was so hard up he had to keep on wearing his uniform because he couldn't buy some regular clothes. First time I saw him was when he come into Winebrenner's pool room at 43rd Street and asked for a job. He didn't eat anything for a couple of days. 'Come on and have some lunch with me,' I said. He ate more than $4 worth of food in an hour and a half. In half an hour. 'Did you start him in business?' I inquired. 'Start him? I made him.' 'Oh.' I raised him up from nothing, right out of the gutter. I saw right away he was a fine appearing, gentlemanly young man. And when he told me he was an Oxford, I knew I could use him good. I got him to join up in the American Legion. and he used to stand high there. Right off, he did some work for a client of mine up to Albany. We were so thick like that in everything. He held up two bulbous fingers, always together. I wondered if this partnership had included World Series transaction in 1919. Now he's dead, I said after a moment. You were his closest friend, so I know you'll want to come to his funeral this afternoon. I'd like to come. Well, come then. The hair in his nostrils quivered slightly as he shook his head. His eyes filled with tears. I can't do it. I can't get mixed up in it, he said. There's nothing to get mixed up in. It's all over. When a man gets killed, I never like to get mixed up in it in any way. I keep out. When I was a young man, it was different. If a friend of mine died, no matter how, I stuck with them to the end. You may think that's sentimental, but I mean it, to the bitter end. I saw that for some reason of his own, he was determined not to come, so I stood up. Are you a college man? He inquired suddenly. For a moment, I thought he was going to suggest a, connection, but he only nodded and shook my hand. Let us learn to show our friendship for a man who he is alive, and not after he is dead, he suggested. After that, my own rule is to let everything alone. So basically, only have a friendship when it helps you, kind of. I don't know. When I left his office, the sky had turned dark and I got back to West Egg in a drizzle. After changing my clothes, I went next door and found Mr. Gatz walking up and down excitedly in the hall. His pride in his son and in his son's possessions was continually increasing, and now he had something to show me. Jimmy sent me this picture, he said. He took out his wallet with trembling fingers. Look here. It was a photograph of the house, cracked in corners and dirty with many hands. He pointed out every detail to me eagerly. Look there. And then sought admiration from my eyes. He had shown it so often that I think it was more real to him now than the house itself. Another example of people being sucked into the external and the material and the unreality of things, right? Jimmy sent it to me. I think it's a very pretty picture. It shows up well. Very well. Had you seen him lately? He come out to see me 2 years ago and bought me the house I live in now. Of course, we was broke up when he run off from home, but I see now there was a reason for it. He knew he had a big future in front of him, and ever since he made a success, he was very generous with me. He seemed reluctant to put away the picture. Held it for another minute, lingeringly, before my eyes. It's almost like he's like, it's kind of okay that he's dead because he achieved so much.
Mm-hmm.
And...
yeah. I just think it's like his dad's kind of like, I don't know. It's confusing to me because it seemed at first he was sad that he was dead. Now he's like at the house, like impressed with everything, you know?
Well, he was sad at the beginning.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, but it's just kind of like a weird change. Like he still didn't expect it to go this direction.
Mm-hmm. But his dad has, just like everybody, except for Nick, he has been...
once he gets a taste, right?
Yep, he's been swayed.
Yeah.
He's been brought over to the other side. Then he returned the wallet and pulled from his pocket a ragged old copy of the book called Hopalong Cassidy. Look here, this is a book he had when he was a boy. It just shows you. What does it show you? He opened it at the back cover and turned it around for me to see. On the last flyleaf was printed the word schedule and the date September 12, 1906. Underneath, rise from bed, 6 a.m. Drum bell, exercise, and wall scaling, 6:15 to 6:30. Study electricity, 7:15 to 8:15. Work, 8:30 to 4:30. Baseball, sports, 4:30 to 5. Practice, elocution, poise, and how to attain it, 5 to 6. I think elocution is public speaking.
Yeah.
Study needed inventions, 7 to 9. Study needed inventions, I love it. General resolves. No wasting time at shafters or a name indecipherable. No more smoking or chewing. Bathe every other day. Read one improving book or magazine per week. Save $5, crossed out. $3 per week. Be better to parents. I came across this book by accident, said the old man. It just shows you, don't it? It just shows you. Jimmy was bound to get ahead. He always had some resolves like this or something. Do you notice what he's got about improving his mind? He was always great for that. He told me I ate like a hog once, and I beat him for it. He was reluctant to close the book, reading each item aloud and then looking eagerly at me. I think he rather expected me to copy down the list for my own use. What was on this list? So we've got real, exercising, so that's real, studying electricity, and I don't know what that really means. Like how it works, how to be an electrician.
Yeah, I guess that'd be like people nowadays, like maybe getting into coding or something like that. Like that's like the technology of the time.
Mm-hmm. And he works, and he has sports for 30 minutes. And then he practices public speaking, like, how to look good to other people.
Mm-hmm.
Studying needed inventions. Because what does somebody what do inventors do, right? They are like the first people to do something. They're the discoverers. They're the famous people.
Mm-hmm. I don't know what that means, though. I think that's funny. Like, study needed invention. How do you study?
I know, right? You're like, look around, you're like, what do I need?
Yeah.
It's not been invented yet. Like how I want my trash can to automatically tie the bag itself and then have like wheels underneath and drive itself to the front door. So I just have to pick it up and take it outside.
Okay.
I think I could make this happen. All I need is a Raspberry Pi computer, a scale, electric scale, and a remote control car.
Yeah.
Kat says, or I can just take out the trash.
Or a Roomba, and you just program it. Oh, but it has to tie itself.
Oh, I don't think I can do the tying itself part. I think I have to tie it myself.
Yeah.
Needed inventions. Gatsby, where are you? A little before 3, the Lutheran minister arrived from Flushing, and I began to look involuntarily out the windows for other cars. So did Gatsby's father. And as the time passed, and as the servants came in and stood waiting in the hall, his eyes began to blink anxiously. And he spoke of the rain in the worried, uncertain way. The minister glanced several times at his watch, so I took him aside and asked him to wait for half an hour. But it wasn't any use. Nobody came. About 5 o'clock, our procession of 3 cars reached the cemetery and stopped in a thick drizzle beside the gate. First, a motor hearse, horribly black and wet. Then Mr. Gatz and the minister, and I in the limousine. And, a little later, 4 or 5 servants and the postman from West Egg in Gatsby's station wagon, all wet to the skin. As we started through the gate into the cemetery, I heard a car stop, and then the sound of someone splashing after us over the soggy ground. I looked around. It was the man with owl-eyed glasses, whom I found marveling over Gatsby's books in the library one night 3 months before. I'd never seen him since then. I don't know how he knew about the funeral or even his name. The rain poured down in thick glasses, and he took them off and wiped them to see the protecting canvas unrolled from Gatsby's grave. I tried to think about Gatsby then, for a moment, but he was already too far away, and I could only remember without resentment that Daisy hadn't sent a message or a flower. Dimly, I heard someone murmur, "Blessed are the dead that the rain falls on." Then the owl-eyed man said, "Amen to that," in a brave voice. Notice that there's more people there who worked for Gatsby than actually liked Gatsby.
Yeah. The servants.
Yeah. We straggled down quickly through the rain to the cars. Owl Eyes spoke to me by the gate. "I couldn't get to the house," he remarked. "Neither could anybody else." "Go on," he started. "Why, my God, they used to go there by the hundreds." He took off his glasses and wiped them again outside and in. "The poor son of a bitch," he said. One of my most vivid memories is of coming back west from prep school, and later from college at Christmas time. Those who went farther than Chicago would gather in the old dim Union Station at 6 o'clock of a December evening with a few Chicago friends already caught up into their own holiday gaieties to bid them a hasty goodbye. I remember the fur coats of the girls returning from Miss This and That's and the chatter of frozen breath and the hands waving overhead as we caught sight of old acquaintances and the matchings of invitations. "Are you going to the Ordways, the Herseys, the Schlutzes?" And the long green ticket clasped tight in our gloved hands. And last, the murky yellow cars of the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railroad looking cheerful as Christmas itself on the tracks beside the gate. When we pulled out into the winter night, the real snow, our snow, began to stretch out beside us and twinkle against the windows, and the dim lights of small Wisconsin stations moved by, a sharp wild brace, came suddenly into the air. We drew in deep breaths of it as we walked back from dinner through the cold vestibules, unutterably aware of our identity with this country for one strange hour before we melted indistinguishably into it again. That's my Middle West. Not the wheat or the prairies or the lost swayed towns, but the thrilling, returning trains of my youth, and the street lamps, and the sleigh bells in the frosty dark, and the shadows of holly wreaths thrown by lighted windows on the snow. I am part of that, a little solemn with the feel of those long winters, a little complacent from growing up in the caraway house in a city where dwellings are still called through decades by a family's name. I see now that this has been a story of the West, after all. Tom and Gatsby, Daisy and Jordan and I were all Westerners, and perhaps we possessed some deficiency in common, which made us subtly unadaptable to Eastern life. Even when the East excited me most, even when I was most keenly aware of its superiority to the bored, sprawling, swollen towns beyond the Ohio, with their interminable inquisitions which spared only the children and the very old, even then it had always for me a quality of distortion. West Egg especially still figures in my more fantastic dreams. I see it was a night scene by El Greco, 100 houses at once conventional and grotesque, crouching under a sullen, overhanging sky and a lusterless moon. In the foreground, 4 solemn men in dress suits were walking along the sidewalk with a stretcher on which lies a drunken woman in a white evening dress. Her hand, which dangles over the side, sparkles cold jewels. Gravely, the men turn in at a house, the wrong house, but no one knows the woman's name, and no one cares. So he paints almost like this picture of the East as like without personality or individuality, right? Just all these houses that are kind of the same, all of these people that are kind of the same, so much so that they bring in someone who's passed away and who's died, right, on a stretcher into the wrong house, but no one cares because it's all the same, right? That's his conclusion about the city and about the romantic kind of like fast-paced place to really make it, which is like New York City. That's his conclusion. That's just this place that lacks any sort of personality.
Yeah, it just never stops. I guess, like the city that never sleeps, but he's saying that like that's a bad thing,
Mm-hmm.
Just, what is it, interminable inquisitions?
I think his story earlier about being at home,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like what stands out to me in that story is that he's kind of retelling or remembering like being with his friends, right? And like going around to places that they knew and that they had memories of and like they had like connections to, right?
Yeah.
And then that's like that contrasts with this, which is like a place without any sort of connection.
Yeah. Like he doesn't describe anything specifically. There's not even any names.
Right. Yeah. After Gatsby's death, the East was haunted for me like that, distorted beyond my eyes' power of correction. So when the blue smoke of brittle leaves was in the air, and the wind blew the wet laundry stiff on the line, I decided to come back home. The blue smoke of brittle leaves. So they're burning leaves, presumably. I think that's what they mean. Because like if you burn leaves, usually it's like that gray blue smoke.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, when they're still wet a little bit, or they're moist from the dew.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think that's just another weird thing. Like, remember before it's like the blue.
The weird colors.
Yeah, they're like weird. Like, what were you saying? Something is never blue.
Oh, it was at the party. What was it?
It was like the leaves on a tree were blue or something.
Yeah, something like that.
Blue dress, right? The color that she described it.
Yeah.
But then later there was something else that was like blue.
Yeah, that's not blue. I can't remember what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's the blue again.
It's like the world's not natural. It's unnatural. That's the problem.
Yeah.
There was one thing to be done before I left, an awkward, unpleasant thing that perhaps had better have been let alone. I was like, I didn't even like read below yet, and I was like, unpleasant, awkward. It must be about Jordan, but but I wanted to leave things in order and not just trust that that obliging and indifferent sea to sweep my refuse away. I saw Jordan bigger and talked over and around what had happened to us together, and what had happened afterward for me. And she lay perfectly still, listening in a big chair. Notice that this is Nick trying to not leave waste behind. He's trying to like clean up his mess, unlike everybody else. She was dressed to play golf, and I remember thinking she looked like a good illustration. Her chin raised a little jauntily, her hair the color of an autumn leaf, her face the same brown tint as the fingerless glove on her knee. When I had finished, she told me without comment that she was engaged to another man. I doubted that, though. There were several she could have married at a nod of her head, but I pretended to be surprised. For just a minute, I wondered if I wasn't making a mistake. Then I thought it all over again quickly and got up to say goodbye. Nevertheless, you did throw me over, said Jordan suddenly. You threw me over on the telephone. I don't give a damn about you now, but it was a new experience for me, and I felt a little dizzy for a while. So now she can't even be his friend, right? She's like, I don't give a damn about you.
I think what happens is she did like him, and he hurt her. And she's like, oh, I'm engaged to someone else this whole time. You know what I mean? Like, she's just trying to, like, play it off.
Yep, exactly.
Jordan has to win, right?
Jordan has to win. Yeah, it's true, right? She even if she cheats, she has to win. We shook hands. That's awkward. Oh, and do you remember, she added, a conversation we had once about driving a car? Why, not exactly. You said a bad driver was only safe until she met another bad driver. Well, I met another bad driver, didn't I? I mean, it was careless for me to make such a wrong guess. I thought you were rather an honest, straightforward person. I thought it was your secret pride. I'm 30, I said. I'm 5 years old, 5 years too old to lie to myself and call it honor. She didn't answer. Angry and half in love with her, and tremendously sorry, I turned away. One afternoon, late in October, I saw Tom Buchanan. He was walking ahead of me along Fifth Avenue in his alert, aggressive way, his hands out a little from his body as if to fight off interference, his head moving sharply, here and there, adapting itself to his restless eyes. Just as I slowed up to avoid overtaking him, he stopped and began frowning into the window of a jewelry store. Suddenly he saw me and walked back, holding out his hand. What's the matter, Nick? Do you object to shaking hands with me? Yes. You know what I think of you. You're crazy, Nick, he said quickly. Crazy as hell. I don't know what's the matter with you. Tom, I inquired, what did you say to Wilson that afternoon? He stared at me without a word, and I knew I had guessed right about those missing hours. I started to turn away, but he kept a step after me and grabbed my arm. I told him the truth, he said. He came to the door while we were getting ready to leave, and I sent down word that we weren't in. He tried to force his way upstairs. He was crazy enough to kill me if I hadn't told him who owned the car. His hand was on a revolver in his pocket every minute he was in the house. He broke off defiantly. What if I did tell him? That fellow had it coming to him. He threw dust into your eyes just like he did in Daisy's. But he was a tough one. He ran over Myrtle like you'd run over a dog and never even stopped the car. There was nothing I could say except the one utterable fact, that it wasn't true. And if you think I didn't have my share of suffering, look here. When I went to give up that flat and saw that damn box of dog biscuits sitting there on the sideboard, I sat down and cried like a baby. By God, it was awful. I couldn't forgive him or like him, but I saw that what he had done was, to him, entirely justified. It was all very careless and confused. They were careless people, Tom and Daisy. They smashed up things and creatures and then retreated back into their money or their vast carelessness or whatever it was that kept them together and let other people clean up the mess they had made. And I love that Tom is like, look, man, I suffered too. I
Yeah.
cried when I saw those dog biscuits, man.
Yeah, and it's like would have never even existed, right? If you weren't like if you were an honorable man, you know?
Right, but then also like, yeah, he cried, he was sad, but the real suffering would have been
Myrtle, yeah.
if Daisy had been arrested, right? If like they had
Yeah.
like done the honest thing, which they wouldn't do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he also doesn't even mention Myrtle. Like,
He does once, right? She's
well, I mean, like in the suffering, he's like, I don't think I didn't have my share of suffering, and he doesn't. It's not Myrtle. He's like, he wasn't like, oh, my girlfriend died. He's like,
right,
oh, the dog.
right, and it's not about her; it's about him.
Yeah.
It's all about how he was affected.
Mm-hmm.
Because remember, and as this section points out, Tom is the reason that Gatsby is murdered because he tells Wilson, "Oh, that was Gatsby who killed Myrtle.
Mm-hmm.
I know where he lives. I can tell you." So basically, Tom killed Gatsby.
Yeah. Tom's fault.
Yeah, or Daisy's fault also.
Well, I like that smashed up things and creatures and then retreated back to their money.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And there's kind of Fitzgerald's main point, right? That this is what has happened in America. America has turned into like two types of people: those that are rich enough to do this, and then those who have to clean up the messes afterwards.
Mm-hmm. I think he put that on purpose too, next to the thing about Jordan, about the careless driver and all that, because that's basically like what they're doing. They're just not driving, like the movie Crash.
Oh
They're
man,
all crashing into each other. Right?
I don't think I've seen that.
You need to see that movie.
From 2004.
It's from a long time ago. Yeah, like Don Cheadle, Ludacris.
Ludacris. I forgot that Ludacris was an actor.
That guy's named Daniel Pena. He's like in every movie.
I don't know Daniel Pena.
His name's Pena, but
I'll watch it. I shook hands with him. It seemed silly not to, for I felt suddenly as though I were talking to a child. Then he went into the jewelry store to buy a pearl necklace, or perhaps only a pair of cuff buttons, rid of my provincial squeamishness forever. Gatsby's house was still empty when I left. The grass on his lawn had grown as long as mine. One of the taxi drivers in the village never took a fare past the entrance gate without stopping for a minute and pointing inside. Perhaps it was he who drove Daisy and Gatsby over to East Egg the night of the accident, and perhaps he had made a story about it all his own. I didn't want to hear it, and I avoided him when I got off the train. I spent my Saturday nights in, it's like other people profiting off the death of other people, right?
yeah.
I spent my Saturday nights in New York because those gleaming, dazzling parties of his were with me so vividly that I could still hear the music and the laughter faint and incessant from his gardens and the cars going up and down his drive. One night I did hear a material car there and saw its lights stop at his front steps, but I didn't investigate. Probably as some final guest who had been away at the ends of the earth and didn't know the party was over. I love that image of like the last partier who's so disconnected that they don't even know that the party's not happening anymore. On the last night, with my trunk packed and my car sold to the grocer, I went over and looked at that huge, incoherent failure of a house once more. On the white steps, an obscene word scrawled by some boy with a piece of brick stood out clearly in the moonlight, and I erased it, drawing my shoe raspingly along the stone. Then I wandered down to the beach and sprawled out on the sand. Most of the big shore places were closed now, and there were hardly any lights except the shadowy moving glow of a ferry boat across the sound. And as the moon rose higher, the inessential houses began to melt away until gradually I became aware of the old island here that flowered once for Dutch sailors' eyes, a fresh green breast of the New World. Its vanished trees, the trees that made way for Gatsby's house, had once pandered in whispers to the last and the greatest of all human dreams. For a transitory, enchanted moment, man must have held his breath in the presence of this continent. Compelled into the aesthetic contemplation, he neither understood nor desired, face to face for the last time in history with something commensurate to his capacity for wonder. And the reason he points this out, right, is he's comparing the dreaming nature of the people who came over here to discover, or to explore North America, right? Mm-hmm. That they came here with dreams of fortune and dreams of success. And so when he looks out, he sees that again. He's like, yeah, the first people from Europe here were dreaming of financial gain and success and riches, and then nothing has changed.
Yeah, I think for me, it's like they came here for a different life. You know what I mean? Because that's what the Pilgrims and everything. It was like, okay, you're not going to be persecuted. You can go there and do whatever you want and be whoever you want. But then in the end, we talked about this when we were running one day. In the end, they just went back to what everything was. That's what old money is. You know, like they're not people that were excluded from the group in England created their own group over here and are excluding other people. I think that's what it is for me.
Yeah, the idea that people who are oppressed, once they get power, they then, because all humans have a tendency to oppress and to segregate, they will then oppress and segregate others. That it's not necessarily about who they are as to why they're being oppressed, but it's just that they are different. And then once they get into power, then they're going to find a group that's going to be different, and then they're going to oppress them.
Yeah.
And that they can try and be as romantic as they want, but at the end of the day, they're still human.
They're still in the past, living in the past, right? Just like Gatsby.
I don't know, fresh green breast of the new world. So they got this idea of like the new that's coming.
I think that's the green light and the green breast. I think that's the parallel there.
Or it's the breast that is the island because they're like shaped like eggs, kind of. And then the vanished trees, right? Because they're saying like, and then they, Gatsby's mansion was created by like destroying the nature of the area. But again, it comes back to the dreams, right? The human dreams. And what did they want? They wanted their freedom, kind of as you point out. But it all comes back to dreams. And as I sat there brooding on the old, unknown world, I thought of Gatsby's wonder when he first picked out the green light at the end of Daisy's dock. He had come a long way to this blue lawn again, right? And his dream must have seemed so close that he could hardly fail to grasp it. He did not know that it was already behind him, somewhere back in the vast obscurity beyond the city, where the dark fields of the Republic rolled on under the night. Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgastic future that year by year recedes before us. It eludes us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster, stretch out our arms farther, and one fine morning... So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. The end. So basically, to conclude, it seems like Fitzgerald's saying that we all dream and hope for a future that is either as good as our past was or that is going to be great, but in reality we're just going to die. Is that?
I think
until one fine morning.
For me, it all leads back to because he's talking about the American dream, and they're not really like the American dream was founded upon like freedom. Be who you are. You can be anyone.
Yeah, you are afforded the freedom to be who you want to be.
But it seems like everyone's looking back into the past, right? Like the rich people they still have this classism. And Gatsby wasn't that guy, but he had to use it to get to the past that he wanted. So instead of moving forward into the future, everyone is going ceaselessly into the past, which is like the opposite direction of the American dream.
Yes. So the lack of progress. Because did Gatsby progress in his life? Not really, no. Because at the end, when he's dead, he has I would imagine fewer people in his life than he had at the beginning, right?
And it was basically just that's actually pretty funny, yeah, because his dad was the only his parents were the only people you hear about from his past.
Yep.
And his dad's the only one that shows up to the funeral. We mentioned it earlier in the earlier readings how he's still a kid, he's still awkward. He doesn't know how to act around people, he never grew up. He's still this.
He's still that high school kid who's working on the lake, right?
He's still stuck in that time because he wants to go back to it.
Yeah, and so And so I guess it's kind of like, is the American dream true in the sense of, are people able to be what they want and progress in life, or are they not able to do that? Are they not able to move forward?
I think it's more like he's saying like you people, you came here for this, and all you're trying to do is make this what you ran from.
Mm-hmm. You came to this continent for something new, but all you're doing is looking back in the past, and not moving on.
And you're trying to turn this into that. You want to be rich and more powerful than somebody else and control them.
That's interesting. The end. Peace out, guys.
Tomorrow.
Really?